But moving into wild cards, which pairing these two, like you said, Reed, like even with the CW doing it, now that we're doing it, they're so disparate, but yet so enjoyable.
So much fun.
So much fun. Because we're moving from bull riding and trick riding into a road trip to a winery,
Why
which
the heck
is
not?
fun. Also, like there was the side plot about team building, which I really need Alice to talk to HR because it is just they're a nightmare over there. I mean, like in the lightest way possible for a blue sky drama, like, but it's still harassment, and I'm done with it. I'm just done with it as Max is done with it.
His coworkers, you mean?
Yeah, Gates and
Yeah, they're
Simmons,
nasty.
and even the chief of the
Yeah,
department.
he kind of
They're
at his best he ignores it, and at his worst he encourages it. Like that's not a healthy work environment. And I know we're supposed to laugh at it, but yeah, do
There
something
was
about
that
them.
one scene where Max and Ellis walk up to the two other agents, and they were just like snippy. Like she was making up things that she saw. What was she saying? I was like, that was uncalled for.
It was a
And that was
Harry
directed
Potter
at
trope.
Max, right? Max was like, what?
Hmm.
Yeah, so I think that's like when they're deep in the case, like really making some headway. And I believe that's Yates walks up and she says, we got a call from someone with a tip. And she's like, it's an old man named Dumbledore and a little boy with a wand. It's like, I was like, girl, not the dated jokes. Please move on.
But then later in the episode, didn't Ellis stand up for her, where she was like, she solved a murder today. What have you done?
Yes, he did
Didn't
do
he said
that.
Hmm.
that, right? I'm like, yeah,
Hmm.
you better.
And Simmons was like, she solved a Wordle. And I was like, that's not the same
Different.
thing.
And the fact that they argued, had a minor argument about it. Why didn't you say that sooner? They're way around the corner now. They'll never hear it. I think it just highlighted the fact that they're supposed to be partners, and Max and Alice. The whole episode was like, we're not a team, we're not a team. No, they are a team, they are partners. And I really like the team building exercise for that exact reason because Yates and Simmons are awful. And like the fact that they're still speaking to them with such disrespect after they've solved two cases now, two murders, right? And then a third one now, it's just, it'll get repetitive and boring the longer it goes on, which is why it's nice that it's in a show like this with such a spicy dynamic to spice it up. I love the Max and Alice banter, and this episode was full of that.
I know. I will say though, for Alice, I'm like, why are we pretending like we don't like her?
Yeah.
She's fun. He's like, I've been trying to get her to be quiet. And I was like, you don't need to though. She's like, she's the life of the party. She's keeping it fresh every
Mhm.
year as y'all do these long trips over into this town, this small town, which is very much CW, is
Hmm.
screaming CW with everything that was going on in that town from the coven to Lucas's relationship with the members of said coven. And then the love story that they also tacked in there that kind of works too.
They said, "How extra can we get?" And then they said, "All." That's the most bonkers plot you could have imagined. But like again, in a show like this, it worked just so well.
Did you guys notice, I don't know the guy's name, toward the end, the guy with the gun, um, that was his name was Jake in Nancy Drew, right? He owned the diner and we hated him.
That's
All
who that
right,
was.
Always at the
yes.
scene of the crime.
I recognized. It was like, who is that? Oh man.
If the CW needs a villain, he's like, you got me.
That works though. Okay, so for I forget with him and Nancy Drew, he just really didn't want Nick to have the building
Across the
across
road,
the
yeah.
way. And in this one, he's a rich boy, a legacy who apparently has is frauding people with box wine. And I this okay, you guys have to explain this part to me. Was Max saying that the bottles were genuine, but the liquor isn't, well, the alcohol isn't?
I have no idea.
I think that's what I got because they looked put perfectly at home with the bottles, but it was when she picked them up and then like sniffed around it and heard this one's clean, there's nothing in it. They figured out that he was using uh, counterfeit goods, so to speak, to try and manipulate the town into buying it from him because he was losing money and he needed it.
Okay. Because I was like, that part, I was like, is she saying that he is uh, counterfeiting the paper? Or is she saying it's actually just too hard to do that for possibly for him? So these are the genuine article. So that's interesting. It gave very much Not mob. Well, did they say it was the mob that was hiding wine? There's a lot going on as far as this town and the seedy things that were
There was
happening.
like wolves, there was like Riverdale sacrifices happening. There was a lot happening.
But I mean, it was an interesting case though, and it,
It
it
was.
did provide the ability to see both of them doing what they do best.
Hmm.
I did like her interview with the Grape, who also is from Nancy Drew.
Yeah.
Lacey McAllister, the actress's name is Bethany Brown. So that was fun. I've also never seen a grape be interrogated. And there's just something hilarious about her being serious about heartbreak and trying to get information while this woman is decked out as a grape. She's Fruit of the Loom right
I
there.
love how Max can just like do anything and make people believe it. Was she was saying something about like, was it the, oh, she was pretending she could read her aura.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I just now realized read her aura sounds like Rita Ora.
Oh,
I was like, is that why she named herself Rita Ora? But I just think that's her name. Sorry, that just intrusive thought popped in my head when I said read her aura. Anyway.
But Ellis was also investigating well, too. There's the scene in the sandwich shop, which I thought was interesting with the young man who was just well over his head when it comes to,
Mhm.
I guess, providing the town their deli meats. Which there's just something like subtly funny about a lot of the things that they do in this show because he was just overwhelmed, and this one lady is just like, "This is mutton, not lamb." And he's just like, I give up. Like, I can't, I need help.
How old was that poor deli worker?
I was trying to decide, I was trying to figure out whether or not he was early 20s or he was supposed to be a teen who's doing his best.
Very overwhelmed behind that
Yeah.
counter.
Yeah.
I was
No.
very glad that Alice cleared it out, which I was like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. That was
Yeah.
cool.
Again, the law in the show works in mysterious ways. But I yeah, no, I agree. We say the word unserious all the time, and this felt like another one of them situations because like that was kind of portrayed as having higher stakes in the early part of the murder investigation, and it's like just how important this meet was to these people. And it's just like so hilarious. But like it was nice to see Ellis doing his own police investigation and again getting nowhere. Not that he got nowhere, but not as far as like Max, who just goes up and gossips with someone and seems to get all the information from them. That's what she brings to the table, and I think that's why it was so important that this was kind of like the team building exercise episode, and that they made it a thing. Because I said that last week's episode was kind of the one where Ellis hung back and let Max do the bulk of the investigation, but this week they kind of made a thing about it and actually addressed that and the fact that he still didn't see her as a partner, and yet she continued to prove herself and come at him with all this information, even if she got it in the most outlandish of ways. And I also like the fact is we said this show was unserious. We've used the show like we used the word 20 times already when describing the show per week. And Max is such an unserious character, and yet the moment he said we're not a team, the camera stayed off her for a few seconds, and then when it went on her, you could see that actually was really hurtful to her, and she walked off. So I really did like that because far more to her than meets the eye, and she had his back in this episode because you see how important the idea of being a team is. And I like that contrast because you think Alice would have that being part of like a police force, being part of a team there. And look at the state of the team he has to work with. Um, and even though she's supposed to have been a con or a criminal growing up, her family had a stronger code than the force in his police station. And I thought that spoke volumes as to why she is the way she is, and that she may do things that are illegal in terms of the law and stuff like that, but that she has a code and she will stick by that code. And loyalty is so important to her. And I thought that came across volumes this week.
I love that conversation about her family too
Yeah.
Mhm.
at the end because she has such, even though her childhood to anybody else would be like, it's kind of sad. That's kind of what Ellis was getting at, but she doesn't see it that way. She saw it as a fun, happy childhood filled with pop culture, and she didn't feel alone. And I don't, I, I don't, maybe that's a trauma response. She needs to see it as a happy memory, but I know she lit up talking about that, and I don't know, I really enjoyed seeing her get kind of vulnerable and kind of feeling slightly offended at him pushing back at that because he did kind of be like, that's not, it's not right. But I don't know, I really love that conversation.
I think it works twofold to show their different perspectives on life, but I also think what I enjoyed about it is that he's not necessarily entirely wrong.
Yeah,
Hmm.
Whether she wants to see it that way or not, because of the lives that they were leading, they could have been taken from her at any point. She like that's
yeah,
just a fact of who they are and what they do. But at the same time, he can't force his narrative on what childhood should be onto her.
yeah.
And so she got to travel for the world. She got to see different places, and learn from different people. She was watching a lot of TV, but so are people who don't have her family dynamic. It's not necessarily an indicator that she was just so alone that she had to resort to television in order to feel like she was part of a community. Especially because we do get prior to that conversation, we get a phone call between her and her dad, in which he does talk about like some boy she had a crush on back in the day who broke her heart named Francois. Like, so she didn't meet
Of course.
people, you know? Like, she did meet people, and she is really good at making friendships. Like, even with the chef, who is rude, she still takes the
Hmm.
time that when the Siobhan, I think that's the name of the chef. Siobhan tells her, I got fired, but it's a good thing. I think I'm gonna open a restaurant. I'm gonna name it after myself. And even though Max is busy, she says, text me when it's open. Like she plans to support Siobhan. I mean, she
Hmm.
probably plans to fleece the rich while she's there too. But the point, but the point is, she establishes connections and she cares about people, and Ella should give her more credit for that.
Yeah. I
Hmm.
think it's important for her to let her know, like, hey, so that's not like you probably deserved a little bit better than that in your
Hmm.
childhood. Like it didn't have to be that way, but I think her making the best of it is also important, like seeing those two perspectives. I
Mhm.
need to rewatch the scene because I don't know, I can't remember how he came at it, but I feel like he could have come at it a little bit gentler.
Yeah,
Mhm.
wasn't it? It was quite confrontational. He was like, "You really don't see it, don't do you?" And
Yeah.
she had to ask, "What do you mean by that?" And it did get a bit awkward between them, but the banter sorted it out.
And then she
But
was like, we have hats.
lovely way to end. But I also really like that as a Max character moment because we said this last week about the conversation in the car and that you started to understand who she was as a person because of that. And the same here, like the way she said she name dropped all the shows and movies that she watched. She mentioned Sarah Connor, she mentioned Dawson and the gang, which and I feel like that was so important because like ever since we first met Max, she's been making pop culture, she's been making TV references, and this very much defines who she is. And I see
See,
why.
I I know Sabrina for the past few episodes you've mentioned that there's been like critique about pop culture references in writing. I don't know, was anybody saying about this show or is that just like a general critique?
I think it's a general
General
critique, is it?
critique. I
Yeah.
don't think anyone so far as I'm aware has been saying that they dropped too many pop culture
Because I'm like,
references.
I don't know, it works.
It does.
And as somebody who like writes that way, I'm like, let me live one.
Yeah.
It doesn't work in every genre, but this is like 75% of comedy. So like it works in comedy writing. That's like part of like joke writing is like referencing things. So like even in this episode too, like it's used as a tool to get to know her. Like when she offhandedly says like when she mentions Dawson's Creek, she's like there's a lot of drama. Like it's funny and
Yeah.
it tells you about her. And I'm like I had that in the back of my mind where like you were saying people don't like pop culture references in TV. And I'm like, I have to disagree with that camp. I think when it works, it works. And I don't think there's such a thing as too much, unless it's like they throw one in. It's like, okay, that was a reach. That didn't work. That didn't land. But I think it always works in the show.
Yeah, well, I think here it also speaks to their characters. Like, I want to learn more about Yates because she too is dropping pop culture references, but they're a little older than
Hmm.
Max is, which is interesting to me. Because even like Max is on the phone and she's asking for backup, and she's like, Yates, stop with the Serena jokes. The moment has passed, right? Like, so I think once Yates gets over herself, those two might end up developing a friendship because they can sort of bond over television and books and films, most likely.
Yeah. And I think too, learning that Max spent a lot of time watching or consuming media informs a lot about her character. She wouldn't be the same detective con woman, whatever you want to call her, that she is to be able to like read people and like be an actress if she hadn't consumed so much television. And I think this is one of my other soapboxes is like I was that kid that watched a lot of television and I constantly heard like, oh, kids shouldn't watch that much television. They need to da, da, da. I'm like, if I didn't watch as much like television and consume as much media as I did in my childhood, I wouldn't be able to do my job well because I would have no base knowledge. So like I constantly want to look at those people and be like, if I was outside and not watching every episode of Friends, I would be out a lot of money because I wrote a lot of posts about Friends. And I mean, like, let people do what is passionate to them because it
Mhm.
informs who they become. And maybe
Yeah.
that's not television, maybe it's sports, and that informs their, if they're a sports writer or an athlete. I'm like, let people do what hobby speaks to them because obviously it helped Max be the person she is today. 'Cause she's seen a lot in life and on TV, and that's helpful. And
Yeah.
I'll step off the soapbox.
If my earphones were not attached to my computer right now, I'd give you a standing ovation because that deserves it. Honestly, I felt like that for so long. Thank you for putting it in better words than I ever could.
You know, y'all would not have this podcast if it weren't for the
Yeah.
amount of television that we've consumed, and
Collectively
film
and
was, yeah.
individually.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think also, I mean, there's a particular type of person who just loves to disappear into other worlds, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
and for Max, I mean, she generally just loves media, but also it's kind of in a way a part of her con work. She
Yeah,
has
yeah,
more characters to pull from because she's paid attention to more, I don't know, personalities, characteristics, the way people hold their body, because it's all different. She's an actress. Like
yeah.
she really
Mhm.
just is. And so it's fun. For those who are like not into the pop culture references,
Maybe you just don't understand them.
it's possible, which you know what, which would be funny. And maybe there are people that don't, but I feel like they're also picking the most popular ones and still making it work.
Yeah,
Hmm.
Like they're
Yeah.
yeah.
not deep cuts
It's not
whatsoever.
like Gilmore Girls where it's like you have to like pause and Google some of these ones if you don't understand them. But like also if you don't understand the reference in Gilmore Girls, it doesn't ruin the plot.
Mhm.
You can keep watching. It's fine. You're just like, oh, that's Lorelai dude, pulling some obscure random reference from the 80s. It's fine.
And once you get used to it, you go with it. And the same goes with this. Obviously, we just said they're the more pop culture relevant ones, but like you just know Max is going to come out with a line or two like that per episode now. And I just think it enhances the story rather than take away from it. It's not a wasted line of dialogue by any means. It speaks volumes as to who she is. And now I think after this conversation, particularly in episode 3, it's going to continue to enhance it even more now because it informs every character she plays. It informs everything she has to do as a detective, even something as dramatic like I am an officer of the law. In 2 episodes ago, you saw everything, every like movement behind what she did, and yeah, I love it so much. I wouldn't change that for the world. That it is part of who she is, and like we just said, speaking as someone who felt like that, it's nice to see a part of yourself represented on screen because
Yeah.
it can
Yeah.
it absolutely can inform who you are, no matter how much you take in when you're younger.
Hmm.
Yes, which is why it's so nice to see all of Max represented. Ellis, our onion, is still being pulled back. And she's doing her best though to try to get this man to open up. Like he's like, I was an average kid, you know, got average grades, did this and this, and I was like, Ellis, I know you did more than that. Please just share. It'll be okay. But it was interesting that she's already noticed how much anger he bottles, and she's just
Hmm.
trying to get him to uncork it.
Hmm.
And he's so resistant to that, to the point that they had their real first fight, and it was his fault.
Yeah.
And I appreciated that he apologized, but I wish that he had apologized before she had to call him out on what he was doing
Hmm.
there. Because an I'm sorry goes a long way when the person doesn't have to ask you, is that why you're here?
Hmm.
Hmm.
It
Yeah.
definitely played into their dynamic there. Of course, it was going to be Max who was in first with a funny one liner, but I know what you mean. I feel like maybe long term there could be a more serious one at one point where one of them will have to say an actual I'm sorry and that it won't be a joke. But like it did say a lot about Max, who usually takes things as a joke, took that quite seriously, and yet was still willing to accept his apology with humor before he'd even said it. It definitely speaks to who they are. But also on that note about him being an onion that needs peeled back, I think we were on to something last week about him and his dad and the history as police officers and like that being who he was because this episode actually had that line on the previously. I was like, why is this being brought up on the previously on? Is it going to come up? And then it didn't. All it came up again was that Max said, oh, you're a legacy child because you followed the footsteps of your father. And he's like, no, I'm not. And he didn't really like that reference. It slightly touched a nerve, but he knocked it off because they needed to talk about the case. But I do feel like maybe more as we go on, that will come up again. That it's not to say that he didn't want to become a police officer, but it is to say that maybe that his father's viewpoints or his father's way of life was maybe forced on him. I don't know. Maybe I'm overreaching there, but the fact that they actually made the effort, like it came up in a one-liner in the episode about him being a legacy kid. We didn't need that on the previously to remind us. So I do feel like there's some kind of like undercurrent there of it going on that eventually he will open up a bit more about that.
Yeah, no, you're right. Why is he so resistant to being lumped in with his dad? Much to
Mm-hmm.
consider. I'm
And
sure it'll come up.
yes, but it also makes me wonder if his father didn't work at that particular precinct because you feel like if he shamed the family name, someone should have said it by now, or
Mm-hmm.
if his father was a corrupt cop,
Yeah, is
someone
that
should
why
have
they
already
bully
said.
him?
Like it was like, oh, you're just like your dad. And like
Mm-hmm.
you shame the badge just like him. Like I would like to know more. I mean, I'm sure we'll get there. We're only
Yeah.
3 episodes in. We're not going to rush the plot, but still.
Was Mark in this episode?
I was wondering that because Jacques Mo said he was in every episode, and I was trying to remember if I saw Mark.
I was sitting here the whole time thinking like I don't remember seeing the cat.
I don't think he was. Because when he said his car was robbed, I was like, you leave Mark alone. Like he better not be in that car. And thank God he was. Because when he started looking, I was like, what? Okay, I know Max is looking for her a stylish outfit, but like, what are you looking for? I was like, you better not be looking for the cat. And then he was like, oh no, they've taken my vest. I was like, it's only a vest, that's fine. But aside from, I think they made a reference to Max in the app or to Mark in the episode, but I don't think he showed up.
I'm trying to
Hmm.
remember the opening, whether or not we were on. At any point, are we on the boat?
I don't,
Because
I don't
Mark's
think.
usually on the boat.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Hmm. Well, maybe he's referenced in every episode
Week off, King.
then. He said, I did my two. I'll see you in a few more episodes. But before we close out, though, I did want to preview the episode 4 because it's going to be a fun one. Ellis is going undercover.
Oh, really? Oh, that sounds fun.
It's the did you see the preview,
I
Michael?
didn't get to see the preview now.
They're like surfing something.
Hmm.
They showed Ellis in a wetsuit.
Yes, we've seen that in some of the promos. Okay, so they're finally getting that episode.
Yes, because a surfer gets shot, I believe. And so they have to work the case, but Ellis has to be the one to go into disguise and pretend to be somebody else while Max does the detective work.
I
Oh,
love it.
cool.
Yes, based on the images, though, I think Yates and Simmons are also going to be given something to do because it seems like it's
Ugh,
all hands on deck.
not them.
But it might, mean we get a little bit more from them besides one-liners and bad
Hmm.
jokes.
Hmm. I
Mhm.
think that's a good thing.
Yeah,
We'll decide next week.
I'm
Yeah.
excited. And I mean,
Yes.
like, I know we've done in the past 4 episode tests, but like this, we passed the 4 episode test on episode 1. So like,
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't even need to see next week's to factor into the 4 episode test. Ride 2. I'm in, whatever, you know? YOLO.
Yeah. Well, we're on the ride to manifest season twos for both of them.
Yeah.
The wild ride.
Oh, love
Hey.
it.